Welcome to the program from our undisclosed location somewhere in America's great Midwest. Thank you for finding us. We have a special guest. I'm Ron Coleman. Tonight we have Steve Mashni. He's an ex-Muslim Christian evangelist who has a television program that broadcasts around the world. An author and missionary, he's written several books about his experiences in the Middle East and about the miraculous salvation experiences of Muslims. Very important there. His adventures evangelizing Muslims was once met with gunfire. As he was driving, he was shot 14 times, 14 bullets, and miraculously nothing happened to him, although his guitar was blown apart. His book, Out of Darkness into Light, True Life Stories of Muslims Coming to Jesus Christ Through Visions, Dreams, and Miracles. Welcome aboard, Steve Mashni. How are you?
I'm doing really good. Thank you for having me today.
So you, tell us a little bit about you first.
Well, as you can tell from my accent, I'm a native-born American and raised here, and my father is a Muslim, still is, and my mother is Catholic from Brazil, and they met in Brazil and then came up to the U.S. in 1960. And I was born in 1963 in California, and I was raised here in the U.S., till I was 9 years old. And, when I was born, there had been an agreement between my mother and father that I would be raised a Muslim because my father's Muslim, and whenever in Islam and Arab culture, whatever the father is what you will be,
Mm-hmm.
And so, and actually the wife is also supposed to become a Muslim, but my father didn't press that issue with my mom.
There is your first miracle. That has to be the first miracle. A Muslim and a Catholic together. How do they get along?
Well, actually that is a very, very common combination. Many of my uncles did the exact same thing. And what they used to do is many of the Palestinian men used to go to Brazil because they would marry a woman from there who would make it easy for them to come to the United States. Oh. And so, because it was easy for Brazilian women to come to the U.S., so that was a very common trick that they used to use. And, to be honest, many of the marriages actually lasted, the entire lifetime, and there was true love between them, and the men, none of the men I knew forced their wives to become Muslims. And, but there were some of the women who did become Muslims of their own will. But those close to me, however, none of them became Muslims. They all remained Catholic, and including my mother. But their marriage didn't last. They were divorced when I was 9 years old. And then when they were divorced, my dad was afraid that my mother would come take me from him, and so he took me to his village in the Middle East. And I lived there for 3 years, and I was 9 years old at the time. And I was very spiritually hungry, and I loved Jesus. Even as a child, I loved Jesus. I loved the movies like Ben-Hur, The Robe, and those type of movies. I didn't really know too much about Jesus because I wasn't allowed to go to church, and my mom would never speak to me about the Lord because she didn't want to make waves in the house, So when I went to the Middle East, I wanted to find out about Jesus, and they told me about the Muslim Jesus. His name is Isa.
Didn't know there was one.
And the Quran actually has 25 references to Jesus, only 4 references to Muhammad. So Jesus is very prominent in the Quran. However, there are similarities between the Jesus of the Quran and the true Jesus. Number one, they say that he was born of a virgin. They say that he did miracles. He raised the dead. He healed the blind. He healed the leper. They even say that he created a bird out of clay, that he spoke as a baby in the manger. things that are from like some of those miracles are from the Gnostic Gospels, like the Gospel of Thomas, and but so they have great regard for Jesus. They consider him the Messiah. They believe he's going to come back and judge the world. But there's two very big differences between the Muslim Jesus and the true Jesus, and that is that the Quran says that he is not the Son of God. He is not divine. And that's a very, very often repeated thing in the Quran, is that Jesus is not the Son of God. It says God has no sons over and over and over again. And that's based on the misconception that Muslims have, that they think that we believe that there was some kind of sexual relationship, and that because the Quran says, for instance, how could God have a son when he doesn't have a wife? It asks that question, because they're thinking of it in the physical terms. See?
Right.
So, but the other difference between the true Jesus of the Bible and the Jesus of the Quran is that they say that Jesus was not crucified. They believe that God took Jesus up into heaven and made one of the other disciples, most say it was Judas, to look like Jesus, and that disciple was crucified in Jesus's place. So those are the two big differences between the real Jesus and the Jesus of the Quran. But anyway, for me, I was spiritually hungry, and they taught me, about their Jesus and about Muhammad and about the Quran, about Islam. And I became a very devout Muslim. I'd always been a Muslim by name, culturally, because of my dad. But I really became a very committed Muslim when I started learning, just 'cause, like I said, I was spiritually hungry. And I had a desire even to come back to America because I wanted to convert Christians. I felt like Christians are going to hell. That's what I was taught. And they needed to become Muslim. And so I wanted to come teach Christians about Islam. And then when I was 12 years old, I did return to the United States. And, I continued. I went back to school and just, continued in my, being a Muslim. And, one thing about being a Muslim is that it's very controlling. I really felt the sense of control, and the fear that, that really controls you, to where you don't even imagine ever opening your mind to think about something else, another religion or anything like that, And so I was very devout, very committed, very convinced about Islam. And I continued in that way, after I came back to the U.S. for like 3 years. And I tried my best to follow the principles of Islam and the 5 pillars and all that stuff. But then when I was 15 years old, this was in 1978, it was the night before Easter, I was watching Saturday Night Live on television. And after Saturday Night Live, there wasn't anything else on TV, but I wasn't sleepy. But the one thing there was an Oral Roberts crusade. And he was talking about Jesus dying and come back to life, because it was the night before Easter. And I don't remember everything he said, but the Spirit of God just fell on me so powerfully. And, it's like it says in the book of Acts, God says, in the latter days, I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh. That's what he did. He just poured out his Spirit on me. I was lying down on the bed, and I literally felt, I don't even say that I was a Muslim and I became a Christian. I was dead and I came to life. He just absolutely changed my life at that moment. And I knew that it was Jesus who came to me. And I knew something else. I knew that Jesus was the Son of God. Well, the one who came to me was the Son of God. And it just, it was so miraculous. It was so powerful. And there's just no way I could deny it. It was such a miracle when it came to me. And I was 15 years old at the time. But I knew what that meant. I knew that meant, that I was no longer a Muslim, because I knew Jesus was the Son of God, and I knew that he was real, and one thing about being I was spiritually hungry, you know, and as a Muslim, I was religious and devout and all that stuff, but I was always empty. But when Jesus came, he filled that emptiness, you know, and I was satisfied for the first time in my life, you know, and it just so changed my life. You know, this is like 40 years ago now, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm 53 now. So anyway, that's how I came to know the Lord, and I've been following him ever since. You know, it was such a powerful conversion, you know, and this is very common with Muslims, is that when they come to the Lord, you know, they have very powerful, sometimes miraculous experiences because I think partially because of the strong bondage that is in Islam, the strong mind control that is in Islam, and sometimes demonic control as well.
I was going to ask you about that. You know, that did occur to me. So how did you break it to your dad? Did you just call him and say, by the way?
Well, I was living with him at the time.
Oh,
I was only
that's
15
even
years
better.
Old.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I did is, you know, I wanted to go to a church, you know, I wanted to find out about what happened. I wanted somebody to tell me what happened. You know, it was such a miracle, and it changed me instantly. And I just wanted somebody to explain to me. You know, I knew that it meant that I was a Christian, but I didn't know exactly what I had to do to actually be a Christian. You know, and so I went to a church, and I saw the pastor, and I told him, you know, this happened to me. What do I got to do? And he explained to me and everything like that what I needed to do. And I prayed with him, and you know, and everything. And then I started going to the church on evenings, you know, after school, and just talked to the pastor a little bit. He explained to me a little bit about the gospel, and he gave me a little Gospel of John. I believe it was Gospel of John, and I just took it to the house with me, and I would leave it around the house because I wanted my dad to see it. But he never, I don't know that he saw it, you know, plus my dad doesn't read, you know, he's illiterate. So he maybe didn't, or maybe he saw it and just didn't know what it was.
Right.
And so, you know, I didn't come out and tell him because, you know, in Islam, you know, there's a very strong deterrent against people leaving Islam. And, you know, that's that the current, and Muhammad said that if anybody leaves their religion, you're supposed to kill them. You know, there's a death penalty for converting out of Islam.
That's right.
And I knew that. And so I was, you know, I was trying to be, you know, being in America makes it a little bit safer, you know. But my dad never asked. But then my sister, who was in the Middle East at the time, she came back to America. And when she came back, I told her what happened to me. And she was very upset, you know, and she told my dad. And I remember that day I went out to be with some friends, and then I came home at night, and I just sat in the living room, and my dad said to me, you know, sit down, and I did. And then he said to me, he says, you know, because my Arabic name is Hussein. He said, Hussein, you know, we're family, right? I said, yes, of course. He says, we're Arabs, right? I said, of course, we're Arabs. He said, we're Muslims, right? And you see, I didn't know that much about the Bible, but I did read in that gospel that I was given that if you deny me before men, I'll deny you before the Father.
Oh, boy.
And I knew I couldn't deny the Lord right then. And I just said, no, Dad, I'm not a Muslim anymore. And he said, why? And I said, well, you know, I'm happy this way, you know, and, you know, he threw a shoe at me and told me to leave the house. But then before I left the house, he grabbed me and he sat me down, and him on one side, my sister on the other, and they just kept trying to brainwash me back into Islam. And, you know, he eventually did kick me out of the house. And I went to live with my mother, you know, because my mother had left him 6 years earlier. And so I did go live with my mother. When I did, my mother is Catholic, and so she allowed me to go to church. And I started attending, you know, a church, and I was very growing in the Lord, just experiencing wonderful, powerful miracles and stuff God was doing in my life, and just growing in the Lord, and just it was just so wonderful, to be free, and so I just followed the Lord, and I went to college. I became a journalist, and I worked as a journalist for several years, but I always felt the call to go back to the Muslims and to share with them what happened to me. I know how Muslims will react. They're obviously, instead of wanting to listen, they'll want to try to convert me, back to Islam. If, if they wouldn't, go all the way and obey what the Quran says, which they're supposed to kill me, but then in 1993, I went to Youth with a Mission, which is, an evangelical program to go minister. We went and ministered in Bosnia. This was during the war in Croatia. And then I came back and went to Bible school, and I experienced tremendous